Okay, I'm back. Many of you know me as a microbiologist. I did, as Ryan said, spent quite a bit of time in corporate development as well, and so I'm going to step in here for the investor side very briefly and talk a bit about the economics of all this synthesized together and what the root of the problem is. We have a ton of questions that have come in, so I'm actually going to cut most of my presentation out and just get to the punchline. But first, I just have to show this picture because I've been trying to work this into a presentation for like 3 or 4 years. So this is from the Patagonia catalog, and it's just a good metaphor for, you've nurtured this baby, it's your product, you're trying to get it to your customers, but there's this big chasm in between, and that's a financial chasm, and I'll show you exactly how big that is. One of the drivers of this, though, I think it's important just to talk about stock price as we get into the next slide that I'll show you is, this is Eastman Kodak over 30 years, has nothing to do with any of the people in the room here, hopefully. But you see this big stock spike, and that's usually that's the hope and promise of a clinical development program. You get top line data, it looks great, your stock spikes, all your investors cash out, and that's when you start to, or not all of them, but many of them do, and that's when you start to see your stock prices fall. And so what happens is many of the companies in this space have very low market caps, very low stock prices. So we took a look at the 14 pure play companies that we could think of in this space that are publicly traded, and collectively their market caps are $882 million. All 14 companies could be acquired for $882 million total. That's less than any one company in almost just about any other therapeutic area. The average market cap, this is as of last Wednesday, the average market cap $63 million, and the range is $7 to $187 million. Well, why is this important? Because when you need to raise capital, a bank will only typically let you raise up to 20% of your market cap. So when we talk about all the costs we've just talked about, and you go to do an equity raise, they say, well, actually you can raise $13 million, so hope that gets you to where you need to go. But let's say $37 million is the most you can raise. How far does this get us? And this will be the last slide I show, and then we'll get into the Q&A. Not very far. So I should clarify that this is not an NPV curve. This is just actual year-over-year revenue and cost. So the orange line is actually the first couple of years is the Avycaz launch trajectory, and I smoothed it out, took out the stock out, and just ran it out for 10 years. This is by far the best case scenario with respect to antibiotics we see today. There is no antibiotic that, especially on the gram-negative side, that is selling like this at all. So I made this up, but this is a pretty good example. The gray line are all the costs we just talked about, subtracted from that orange line. So this is every year, we took the three of us took the costs that we talked about over 5 years, and we basically put together a budget, a 5-year budget, and we subtracted those costs every year from that revenue curve. So you can see sales is in orange, net revenue is in gray. You don't even start becoming self-sustaining for about 5 years, maybe 6 years, just based solely on the revenue. If you then add on top of that the cost of running a company, so I added another $40 million, which is a very, very modest budget for running a company. This is for a building, IT infrastructure, HR, accounting, finance, et cetera. Added another $40 million, it pushes it out even farther. So you can see that the line crosses just past 6, so at about year 7, the revenue of your antibiotic is paying for the operations of the company. This assumes you're not doing any other R&D. There is no company out there who is only looking at one product. That gap is $420 million. So this is the number I wanted to get to. This is what drove this whole presentation. That's not $420 million total. That's after you spend $1 billion to bring the drug to market. So this is why people talk about pull incentives. No one has the ability to raise this kind of money, especially when you can only raise $37 million against your market cap. This may be an extreme example. There are other companies that are doing things differently that don't have the same gulf. But even if you cut that number in a third, and it was $130 million, where are you going to get that money from? No investor is going to give you $130 million that you're essentially shoveling into the garbage can to pay for this golf. Because if someone gives you $50 million, they know you still have to raise another couple $100 million, and their equity stake gets totally diluted, and they basically will never make their money back. So this is the crux of the problem. It's this. Our colleagues on the NGO side that have given us all sorts of push incentives have done a tremendous job, and they've completely saved the R&D pipeline. But this is the crux of the problem for why we're not seeing drugs stay on the market and be commercially successful, and why companies, obviously Achaogen went bankrupt, there may be others to follow, but none of these companies are doing well, and it's why it's tough to invest in this space. So I'll stop there. We'll get to questions.